I'd have to do some more reading into the details of what you're asking, but I do think diffusion would overlap with those concepts that you just laid out. And uh, you know, that little, pause and stepping back and looking from and not just structured by, uh, that's something that has pretty broad application. I think we can use some of those same skills all the way down, not just with sort of judgmental and obvious judgmental thoughts, but even with our direct experiences in some ways, because if you look at a snake, you think you're looking at a snake. No, you're just interacting with a part of the world that's dangerous to you. And evolutionary history has established certain kinds of things that are dominant. And there's lots of other things you don't see. You don't see the heat of the snake. You don't see the gravity from the snake. You don't, it didn't establish that. You just, so it, I think we have to, not have to, but it'd be helpful to us to sort of stay with a fairly humble and open process at the level of perception and cognition and emotion and urges and behavioral predispositions and all those things, putting in a little bit of a possibility for variation, and so that the world has a chance to reveal other functions that are useful to us. I mean, systems don't evolve without variation, and variation, selection, retention, and context at the right dimension and level. That's how evolution works. And what we're trying to do with our clients is simply establish an evolutionary path for them. So as far as maybe you can ask it in a different way in the details, but I resonate to what you're saying as being overlapping with diffusion methods. And by mentioning things like even perceptual functions, I'm just meaning to say that this same basic theme applies not just to, rational thought, let's say, or a particular conceptualized self or formulation of your problems. It goes all the way down to who you even take yourself to be, who are others, what the world you lived in, what are these perceptual functions about, and trying to hold them all lightly. Pursue your values passionately, but hold it lightly, and hold your experience in and with the world with enough flexibility that new behavior has a chance to emerge. Yeah, and could we step back also from even that analysis? You talked about representations. One reason I went to the snake was, can we step back also from the presentations, not necessarily the re-presentations? I mean, this stepping back process, I think, not to produce paralysis, you can do that, not to produce unhealthy sense of distancing, but just to produce response flexibility. In and with the one world, there's many, many things you can do. And the Stoicism kind of piece where it really goes into, no, it's only our thoughts that make it so. It puts too much primacy in symbolic thought, in my opinion. I would say something more like this. This is the way Skinner said it. You never interact in and with the one world from the epicycle of Mercury. You can never step aside and look back and say, oh, this is what's really going on. And that's not just cognitively, that's perceptually, that's in every other possible way. And so let's just admit that we're not so smart and we never will be so smart, and take this attitude of a bit of separation and openness to possibility, openness to novelty, openness to surprise, and with the humble guidance of workability. I don't know why, but this works better. That level of just, and scientists can work on why. That's part of their game. But clinically, I think the spirit, I take to be the spirit of a Stoic kind of approach, applies to everything, including Stoicism itself. We're just talking here, gang. We're just talking. What we're doing right now, we're just talking. Is this useful? I don't know. What are you trying to accomplish? So always just keep coming back, and never trying to separate yourself or get up on a throne and say, I know, bullshit. You don't know. You're just talking. Yeah, I used earlier the example of word repetition, but physicalization is actually almost even easier, like of like taking a difficult thought and imagining that it's an object and then asking questions about color, shape, size, etc. And if you wanted to unpack that and say, well, why would that be diffusing? Which it is. We've done enough studies now, component studies. Something I'm very proud of is the ACT folks. Just keep doing these little micro component studies and looking at these processes. And so we're up to about 80 component studies. And that's allows us to say some things about how these things work. And that particular one of physicalizing has been looked at several times in the literature, and I know that it's helpful. Well, earlier we talked about part of diffusion is to look at the process, not just to look at the world structured by the process. That was one thing we said. Well, using the metaphor of an object, objects are things you look at. They have various perceptual functions. And so why would you ask, how much water will it hold? How fast does it go? How powerful is it? What does it feel like on the outside? Does it feel like inside? All those kind of classic ways that we do physicalizing from an act. Why would you do that? Because with each of those questions, we are now interacting with an event that structures the world as if it's in the world to be looked at, not just looked from. And that has a diffusing effect. It's kind of like, metaphorically, it's like pulling the curtain aside the Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz is producing this big, gigantic floating head that's telling you to go get the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West. But when the curtain goes aside, and you see this little guy turning the wheel, and then he says, pay no attention to that man behind the mirror. And nobody's guided by that. It would be the same way. If you can watch how the illusion happens, it's like watching a magic trick when you know the trick. It doesn't sound like magic anymore. And so if we could take this dictator within, this Wizard of Oz voice within that drives people into crazy places in their life, and we can have all the benefits of it. We don't require Wizard of Oz voice very often. Sometimes maybe, do your taxes. Okay. Maybe there's a few times you better do it. But not very often. I know I'm speaking just metaphorically, but what I'm saying is a general principle of diffusion is to arrange conditions in which the process of relating that produces the transformation of stimulus functions is now itself an object of observation. Learning to watch the mind. Just meditating will do that. You just sit and watch. And over time, you begin to notice it kind of has a life of its own. Steve's thinking now, you have this kind of witnessing quality. Well, the physicalizing thing goes directly to a repertoire. A metaphor I use sometimes when I'm talking about this would be, if you looked at the door, let's say, and I said, what does that door look like? And you described it. And then I ran over there and I put cow manure on it. And I said, what does it look like? And I asked you various kind of things. Is that now disgusting? You'd say, yeah, that's disgusting. But you're probably not going to go, and I'm such a bad person, or I'm disgusting. You're looking at a door. It's out there. It could be disgusting, and it's still out there. If I can take, let's say, a thought that I'm a liar and a fraud, well, that's a little bit of cow manure that people usually don't like inside their little cognitive networks. If I can interact with it the way I interact with that door over there, it can have disgusting features without dominating over the rest of my behavior and the rest of the relational network, such that that proves I'm really disgusting. I have to change that, or I can't really be okay about myself. No, I'm going to argue with it. See, there's all these other kind of things I do. No, I'm not. Blah, blah, blah. And next thing you know, life is going on, and you're off in your head trying to, rid yourself of guilt and shame or self-doubt or whatever the thing might be, instead of getting on about the business of living the kind of life that you want to live. So if I could take that thought and turn it into a door to look at, well, we'll put cow poop on it. It's fine. It's fine. I don't know if that's a technically adequate answer, but it's in the domain, and I think the details of that can be roughed out with additional work. I mean, you could use implicit measures of cognition, and you could probably actually show the, as you alter the functions of this part of the network, even neurobiologically, I bet you can show in projection through areas of the brain that, like, for example, this recent study done with chronic pain, teaching people with acne and watching how thoughts and memories of pain project through the brain in a completely different way after a course of act. But not just that, they brought in these poor folks and put thumb screws on them and gave them acute pain. And it had an effect on that too. So you can do things that change how your world works cognitively and directly in these diffusion methods. If you had to pick one thing in all of the things out there in ACT, that you had to pick only one, I'd take diffusion. Second one would be perspective taking. Third would be values. Fourth would be acceptance, flexible attention to the now, committed. They're all important. But if you had to pick one, either perspective taking or diffusion would be in, because they project into all the other ones so powerfully. So I don't know why you picked on diffusion so much, but I kind of agree with you that it's a pivotal process. No, I think it's an awesome place to take it, and I'm glad you're going beyond the kind of obvious thing of just doing it for stimulus presentation inside traditional exposure models or something like that, but actually using it more creatively to sort of do things that help you to see your own psychology in a way that you wouldn't be able to otherwise see it. And my wife and I have grants to do online work, and it's not virtual reality, but we're doing animations about different kinds of psychological spaces, the kind of things like passengers on the bus and things like that. But not just that. I mean, you were talking about physicalizing. It wouldn't be cool if you could create in virtual reality. Like if you can pick among 10 different shapes, sizes, etc., you could probably create your depression as an actual object, right? You could, and that would probably change fundamentally how you interact with depression later on, I think, just very much the same way. Somebody sent me one of these talking emojis that in the new update of the iPhone, and had people dealing with their really painful thoughts in the form of a talking poo, little pile of poop. I think that's awesome. I look at my son Stevie, with his different video games and stuff, and they can be different avatars, and his friends can be different avatars, and you could play out these roles of, almost like the old cartoons of the devil and Goofy and the angel Goofy, from Disney on your shoulders, arguing for good or ill. The technology allows us to enter into these kind of worlds and maybe do things in ways that are much more powerful and quicker and maybe less verbal and chattery and more, because, for example, metaphors that are apt and are visual and perceptual are remembered several times over versus ones that are abstract. Well, you could create a virtual reality experience that's essentially a gigantic metaphor, and it'll be remembered. It's why when I'm working in groups and stuff, I usually want to take these diffusion exercises and so forth and act them out. I'd rather do, taking your mind for a walk or things like that, or the tug of war with a monster. I'd rather actually do it than just describe it. And virtual reality allows you to do something like that. So, yeah, I think that's where it's going to be a place where a lot of this stuff lands, is in guiding how we can use these media tools, because we're going to have to fight fire with fire. I mean, the big problem that's happening, it's hitting young people right now, is the spread of science and technology is overwhelming some of these evolutionary adaptations that are ancient. If we do it in a wiser way, we can flip it in the other way. It's not the technology that's doing that. It's how we're using the technology. And, just putting things out on these very horrific parts of the web, let's say, is not the only way we could go. We can put it inside healthier traditions. So I'm glad you're on to it. I'll be excited to see what you come up with. I predict good things.